Because it's always that awkward moment when you pull the corpse out of the elevator and people are like, "Did you do that?" I don't know anything about this from experience.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 529 of the Dead Robot Society. I'm Terry Mixon. Joining me, Paul E. Cooley. How you doing, man?
Woohoo!
Wait a second. Cheerful sounding Paul Cooley. Who are you, and what have you done with the real Paul?
The real Paul. This is the real Paul.
You're always
really
bah
scary
humbug.
Paul.
Bah humbug.
I'm still bah humbugging. I just thought I'd do something different today.
This is a good thing. Change is good.
Change is good. Change is hard. Change is different. Change is something or other.
All right. I'm not sure that would fit on a bumper sticker, but sure.
Yeah, now that I've laid down my profound thoughts for the day, how the hell are you, man?
Good. Not so productive since we last spoke, but that was just over the weekend when we did the live show.
Right.
And I wrote a chapter since then, but I got sidetracked in other stuff.
Aww.
So I had hoped to be almost done with the book, but I've got about 3 chapters left.
Oh, so slow.
So slow.
Well, I have about 14, 15 research tabs open. So I've been writing and coming across things I need to know. So I'm learning about them and making notes. And this book is rapidly getting research heavy. But I'm having fun.
How can you sleep at night thinking all these evil thoughts of monsters, trashing the world?
Sleep like a baby.
Of course you
It's still better than reality. I'll let you parse that on your own, but yeah. So I've got, I don't know how many words I've got. I don't really care. I've got the story going. It's humming. As soon as I write this one part, now they know what I'm going to do. I'll be off to the races. So it's been fun getting back to the ocean. I'm having a good time, having a very good time.
A day on the beach is something totally different for you than everyone else.
If I were writing anything that takes place on a beach, that would be one thing. But since none of my stories take place on beaches, But I know I won't be swimming in deep water anytime soon.
Oh, sure. Sharks are the least of your worries.
Exactly. Sharks aren't anything to worry about compared to what's in the mesopelagic zone. Mesopelagic? Mesopelagic. Something like that.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah. It's below 625 feet, so yeah. Where is this 625 feet? It's something deep. It's deep. Anyway, yes. I'd say I'm learning all about this stuff. I won't be able to talk about it expertly, but I should be able to drop a few tidbits here and there.
And don't worry. Everybody that gave you grief about your oil rig science is going to give you grief about this too.
Oh, well, what's really funny about that is not many people. I've never really got grief over the stuff I did in the black, surprisingly enough. So maybe I'll get lucky this time too. Maybe I won't completely talk out of my ass. We'll see.
If a story is entertaining, the details can be wrong and most people won't care.
Yeah, it'll get blasted anyway by people who are. Anyway, I won't even go into that. Anyway, that's beside the point. So I'm working, I'm writing, I'm doing my stuff and doing some day job shit. And you are slacking.
I am. And I'm petting a cat.
And you're petting a cat, which is just more proof of your slackage.
If Minnie can't shed all over me, she's not happy.
Well, she's got to be very happy right now because I have a feeling they're going to, get up with a cat fur sweater.
Pretty much. I should make a new cat out of them.
Probably not very difficult.
I'm surprised you can't hear the purr.
I'm deaf. It doesn't matter.
Well, today, Paul, we're going to do something we haven't done in a while. We're going to have a guest.
We're going to have a guest?
I know. Somehow the stars aligned and the piece of junk guy that does the scheduling actually got somebody on the show.
Yay! So who is this person?
Ian Malone. And he writes science fiction. He's writing a book in Chris Kennedy's Four Horsemen universe that should be out by the time this episode comes out.
All right.
So with no further ado, let us get to it. And everyone, I'd like you to go ahead and welcome Ian J. Malone to the show. Ian, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it, fellas. Thank you so very much for having me. I've been looking forward to this all week.
You obviously, have less things to do during the week than most everybody else because we are not the high point of anybody's week.
Well, what can I say? College football season is over with, and we're all looking for something to do right about now until pitchers and catchers report for baseball season. So it's that time.
God. Hey! Wow. Why haven't we had this guy on sooner, Terry?
Bring the noise, gentlemen.
Well, before we start, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience, that would be good so that they'll know who you are.
All right. How you doing, everybody? My name is Ian J. Malone. I'm a native of Tallahassee, Florida. I'm an Aries, and I like long walks on the beach. That notwithstanding, I'm a sci-fi author. During nights, I'm one of those people that does have a day job, so that does occupy a good chunk of my time. That, and I've got a family, so that's a good piece of my life too. So anyway, having put all that out there, I do write. I write science fiction. Depending on the day, sometimes it's military science fiction, sometimes it's science fiction adventure, sometimes it's police procedural with a science fiction twist. It really just kind of depends on what sort of mood I'm in and where my head's at the time, and that's what I go do because it makes me happy. So
Awesome.
My credits include the Mako Saga, which is a space opera trilogy about 5 college buddies from the bar who play video games for kicks on Friday nights and get recruited into an interstellar civil war. Colonies Lost, which became an Amazon bestseller last year, which is kind of the aforementioned police procedural. That was kind of my homage to Louis L'Amour and a lot of the Old West stuff that I used to read. And then I have a forthcoming novel in everybody's favorite MIL-SF universe, the 4HU. And really excited about that. That drops on Friday. So that's me.
Awesome. I know that you had a story in one of the anthologies that I was in with him.
I did. Yep. For a few credits more. Mine was a family tradition, and the book that's coming out on Friday is actually the continuation of that story. So we can get into that later if you guys want.
Sure. I do have one question. Having looked at the cover for that particular novel that's coming out, I looked at that and I immediately said, that's Oliver Peck from Ink Master from behind.
Well, that's who Chris's cover guy came up with. But no, that is the protagonist. His name is Taylor Van Zant. He is from Jacksonville, North Florida, and he is an early 20s bartender from Riverside who grew up in town. His brother died suspiciously in a very abrupt, very tragic starship accident, and he has kind of been left to pick up the family pieces, pick up the pieces for his family, for his sister, for his mom, who's sick. And the mom made a declaration after that day that none of my other kids will ever go Merc, ever. I don't care what we do. None of my kids are going Merc. But they are starving, and she's losing her battle with a degenerative disease, and they can't afford the nanite treatments. So Taylor's got a choice to make, and that is, I'm going to pick up the gauntlet and resurrect the family business and try and make a go of it as a Merc, or I'm going to sit idly by and watch my family fall apart. So being now the man of his house because his dad passed away when he was very young, we all know the route that he takes, and so begins the journey down the rabbit hole. So.
Awesome sauce. Military science fiction is something that I don't know if you've read any of the things that I wrote for that or anything else, but even though some people have said that I write military science fiction, I don't. I write adventure science fiction that may have a military component in it. Is yours along the same line, or do you actually have any stuff that's hardcore military?
No, you nailed it. That is exactly what I do. I am all for. I grew up on a lot of stuff with a military twist, whether it was television or the stuff that I watched in movies, or when I finally later in life became a voracious reader, the stuff that I read. That component has always been there. But first and foremost, I'm about character and I'm about adventure, and I think we write what we know. And, and so that has very much informed what, the type of stuff that I do. So, when I set out to write a 4HU book, before I wrote anything else about the company, about the mech, about the weapons and the worlds and all of that, the first question I asked myself was, who is this kid and why in the heck is he here? Why is he doing this? What is his story? And then my process kind of takes off from there. When it came to writing a lot of the military stuff, whether it was in previous books or whether it was Freebird, and we'll stick with Freebird because it's the new book, I'm all about doing heavy research and leaning on people who I believe have real experience with that sort of thing. So, you know, in the case of Freebird, that was obviously Chris Kennedy, who is the publisher. Anytime I hit a beat when it's like, okay, I'm in a hardcore naval situation here. I want this to sound authentic. I can write it and I can wing it from a story vantage point, and I can make that aspect of it work. But I need to lean on somebody who's really got a mind for this, who can really make it sing for me from an authenticity standpoint. And then I go to work with them, and together we polish it up to make it all that it can be. But no, from a personal standpoint, I'm very much in your wheelhouse, man. It's character, it's adventure, it's that sort of stuff, and the military is just kind of sprinkled in the name of the story.
I think it's pretty amusing that I've written 5 stories for anthologies for Chris, and I'm in the process of writing a 6th, and only one of them has a mech in it, and it's not even really central to the story. It seems that I want to write the oddball quirk characters that are doing weird stuff in the middle of the universe.
Dude, I feel you. I wrote a bar scene. That is what my short story was, and a few credits more. It was a day in the life vignette about a kid tending bar. And he's poor. He's at the end of the ropes. He's trying to figure out what he's going to do with his life. And in walks this guy who represents a very, very wealthy businessman from Atlanta who says, we want to get into the mercenary business. We want to do it here in Jacksonville, and we want to do it with you. We're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. So here it is. And they lay it out and hash it out over beers. That's the entire short story. So I feel you, man. I'm right there with you.
I think that's one of the fun things about the universe is that you can find those stories anywhere. I'm not into the hardcore military sci-fi, as Terry will mention vociferously over and over again. But
your military science fiction is like horror in space.
And there's a problem with that?
Maybe not.
Starship Troopers sold a lot of books, Bubba.
Oh, but that wasn't horror.
I disagree.
See, there's a difference between writing something where you're fighting the monstrosities and it's mostly a view of the universe and you're doing the fighting, whereas the monsters are chasing you through the middle of the ship and trying to eat you.
That's much more fun, though.
I know.
So
I sometimes despair of talking to Paul about what military science fiction is because he makes my brain explode.
Oh, God. So, all right, fine. I'll put the question to Ian. What is your definition of military sci-fi?
Military science fiction is, I mean, it's very military. It's very technical. There's a lot of detail in not only the world, but the procedure and the way that procedure operates. The machinations of what make it go, whether that's the people in it or the machines and the tech that they are using. Everything is very clearly laid out and defined and orderly. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a very, very tight, well-run machine. The military is that way with the way they do business, and therefore a lot of the people who come from that background and get into this genre write their stuff the same way. It's very tight, and it's very technical.
I know that somebody that I know that writes used to wrote science fiction, including some of the Star Trek novels. And he made the comment that Star Trek was actually military science fiction. And I'm shaking my head going, no, it's not.
No, it's not. No,
it's like pornography. You know it when you see
it. Well, it's, not to jump down the tangent here, but I can remember when, just to totally put that theory about Star Trek to bed, I can remember when the first JJ movie came out, and Kirk went from being a nobody flunky in Starfleet Academy who was on the verge of getting drummed out to sneaking aboard a starship to being a first lieutenant to being the first officer in like the span of about 5 minutes of script.
That's not how it works.
We were all just like, come on, man. I mean, we get it. You got to take some liberties here for story, but can we please just be even a modicum of real here?
My tongue is firmly planted in my cheek as I say this, but I figured it was just based on the Coast Guard.
Oh, my God.
Oh, shots fired. Shots fired. Coast Guard people, we really do love you and appreciate your service. Want to put that out right now.
Yeah,
We
now
do.
you're sucking up. Now you're sucking up.
I'm an Army guy, so yeah,
I've seen the
I couldn't help
memes.
myself.
I've seen the memes from J.R. Handley and all these other folks. I don't believe any of it. I don't believe a word of it. You're not sorry. You're terrible people. Terrible people.
I serve, so I have earned the right to mock other branches of service.
There you go. That is a true story right there.
That's
usually it's the Air Force, but I'll go ahead and take a few shots at the Coast Guard while I'm at it.
Yeah, and then it's the Navy and the Marines in the same bar. Always a bad idea. Always a bad idea. So which do you enjoy writing more? Do you enjoy writing more the adventure side or the stuff that touches on military sci-fi like Chris Kennedy?
I mean, again, man, it really just depends on where I'm at in my life and what fancies me at the time. You know, I mean, when I first started writing Mako, my first book, it was 2009, I guess, 2008, 2009. You know, I was a dude who was flamed out of a career. You know, I had dropped out of doctoral school because when the economy tanked, our student stipends were the first things to go. It was doc students, and I didn't have any money. I didn't have any income at that point because my wife at the time and I had split up, and we were on our way to a divorce. And you know, obviously she wasn't bringing any money, so I mean, it was just a bad time. And so when I sat down to write a story, I really didn't even have any intention of writing a story. I just had this quirky idea for some characters in mind about a bunch of goofballs from a bar who were all down on their luck, and they just have each other to lean on. And so they play a game and drink beer and crack jokes. That was it. And I wrote some character bios and said, well, I mean, I guess I could plug this into something. I got time on my hands. I'm sick of writing resumes and cover letters. I might as well do something creative. Lord knows I need the outlet. So I sat down one afternoon over a cup of coffee and some Doritos and said, well, let's see what we can do to make this happen. And so began the process of building my first book. And the core of that series was always very much the heart and soul of the characters and who they were as people and what their stories were, what their trials were, where they were at, the highs and the lows of their relationships together and the things that they encountered and had to survive through together was very much drove the story. And that's what made me happy to write as a writer. You know, I enjoy writing action. It's fun, but it's also very laborious for me. I mean, it's tedious, it's time consuming. I'm very meticulous about how I put a sentence together. I mean, in all forms of writing, you know, you cut anything that obviously does not belong in the story. I mean, when you're running through a chapter and you're deciding what you can trim out, anything that doesn't contribute to the story goes. And nowhere is that more prevalent than in writing, or than in writing action, because you need the sentences to be so short and so tight because you want that rhythm, you want to hit, you want to go, you want to move, you want that momentum. So that takes a while for me to really get to a place in writing a scene like that where I feel like, all right, I'm happy. I can put that into the can and move on. Writing character scenes, writing dialogue, writing two people sitting in a bar, I do that all day long. I'm serious. I can write that for hours and hours and just come out with pages and pages and pages of text. And a lot of it gets cut because it's like, well, as much as I love this and as much heart as there is in this, it really doesn't serve the story. And I've got a 12-page bar scene here. And, well, it really just needs to be 3. So what are we going to do about that? So
sounds an awful lot like Paul.
Well,
yeah, pretty much.
You know, in answer to your question, it really just depends on what I feel like writing at the time. For Mako, it was very much about the characters and the relationships. When I set out to do Colonies Lost, I really did have an eye to write kind of a police procedural with a Western twist. I grew up on mystery novels, and I grew up on Louis L'Amour, outside of spaceships and sci-fi and you know, the more spectacular stuff. That's what I really loved as a kid, and I always wanted to write something like that. So when I started that book, it was with that intention that this is what I'm going to write. It's a mystery. It's a whodunit. It's a guy who's got to go find a missing girl, and that's that. And then I wove in the whole Lost Colony element, and we got into that. And then I had my spaceships. So that was Colonies Lost. With Freebird, it was much more cut and dry. I knew what I was working with the 4HU. The response to a family tradition had been really good. People liked the character. The editors had said that they really enjoyed working with it on the editing end. They wouldn't mind working with me. So I pitched an idea to Chris about where that story would go in novel form. And he and Mark really liked it and said, okay, send us an outline. or send us a very broad story pitch so we know where you're going with this. And I did, and they liked it, and so we started down that process, and that was clearly going to be military sci-fi. So I don't know if that answers your question, that whole long diatribe, but your listeners and viewers learned a little bit more about me and my stuff anyway.
That's always a interesting question to ask because everybody seems to have a different opinion on it.
Sure. Well, I mean, there are those people who can write to market, as they say, and God bless them. I wish I could do that. I wish I had the ability to get on Amazon every day and say, look at this, Vampires in Space with Princesses is selling gobs of books on Kindle. I'm going to go write that. I can't do that. I have a day job as it is where I have to do tons of crap that bores the Jesus out of me. And I do it for a paycheck, and that's fine. There's a time and a place. When I get ready to write a book and write a story, I seek to make money off of that. I'm a businessman. I own my own press. I want to make a profit. But if I don't enjoy it, man, there's college football, baseball, and NASCAR to watch. Like, I can go do that and drink beer, put something on a grill, and be way happier. If I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to do it.
That sounds like something you should do with your pen name, Paul. Twilight in Space.
Twilight in Space. Terry, of all the insane ideas you have thrown out that I need to write.
Okay, sorry. Do we need a moment?
We watched that door fly open behind you.
Yeah, I was the door. Yeah.
This is the place where somebody we can't see behind you sticks a knife in your back and always sees over your head.
As I was saying, what was I saying?
You were going to react to me with Twilight in Space.
Of all the crazy, insane, stupid ideas you have given me to and commanded me to write, that is the latest.
Yes, it is, because I just said it. Obvious it's the latest because it just happened.
The point is, never mind. Forget it. You'll just stomp over it anyway. So, what's the point? I don't know why I talked to you at all.
So you mentioned Louis L'Amour. What type of science fiction influenced you when you were growing up? What authors or books were the ones that attracted you?
Believe it or not, I did not become a voracious reader until I got late into my 20s. And the reason for that is really quite simple. It was just never really a form of entertainment I could access. We were talking off air. I'm legally blind. So for me, my impairment that I have is called retinitis pigmentosa. Long story short, I have no central vision. I see everything peripherally. It's not lens correctable, nor is there a surgery that can fix it. So for me, seeing distances and reading small print doesn't fly. So put that down onto reading books. This whole idea of curling up on a couch on a rainy Saturday afternoon and read a book, or a comic book for that matter. When I was a kid, I would have loved to have been able to do that. It just wasn't accessible for me. In order to read hard copy documents, I have to put them under a machine that's got a camera under it, and it projects it up onto a screen. And then I zoom in and zoom out on the camera to enlarge the font however big I need. And that's great for reading a letter, but for reading a 400-page novel, that ain't happening. Fast forward into my late 20s, and so begins the real rise of audiobooks. Those were around when I was a kid, and we had them, but they were cassettes on big, giant, clunky cassette decks. And then when I got older, you had CDs, which were definitely better than cassettes, but it was still clunky. I mean, you still had to carry a player around, and you ran out of batteries, and you had CDs, and they get scratched, and it was a pain. But, I guess it was around the mid-2000s, I got my first iPhone, and I got a subscription to Audible, and it was on from there. And actually, prior to that, it was my first iPod, not my first iPhone. Being able to download a book in digital file and have it in the palm of my hand to be able to drop in my pocket and go anywhere I wanted at any time of day it changed everything. Walking back and forth from school to home, which was about a 2-mile trek, no problem. I just listened to a book. So I was reading 1, 2, 3 books a week, 2 weeks, just burning through them, everything I could get my hands on. And I read everything. That was when I really started dialing back into a lot of the Louis L'Amour and stuff like that I had read on cassette when I was a kid, or God help me, on vinyl as a kid, because the public library had those. So I really started tapping back into that. But then I started branching out into more of the sci-fi, into things from a literary standpoint. Read a lot of the early Ringo stuff. March Up Country was a great read with him and Weber. John Stakely's Armor was a story that a buddy of mine got me turned on to, which was fantastic. B.V. Larson was making a big rise on Amazon as one of the first kind of exclusive indie guys on Amazon with his Star Force series, which was a lot of fun. Naturally, I went back and had to reread Starship Troopers because anybody in this business has to. So I went back and reread that. Reread a lot of the old Star Wars stuff that I always wanted to read as a kid that I never had access to, at least unabridged. So went back and burned through a lot of that. And it's really just kind of gone on from there, man. If it's a good story, I will read it. That was as true then as it is now. So, and what we read, and you guys know this as well as anybody, what we read informs what we write. And, you know, particularly when I was first getting started writing a book, what's the rule of thumb? Read, and write. The more you do those two things, the better you're going to get at your craft. So I read a ton and still do.
And it's true about informing what you're writing. Whatever I'm reading is influencing what I'm writing in some way or another.
Oh yeah, dude, I have channeled, God bless the man, I have channeled many words, many lines from, or many rhythms rather, from Jonathan Mayberry when trying to write action. I love that guy, man. His Joe Ledger series is just a blast. If you're looking for something to pick up, it's John McClane meets zombies and all kinds of weirdness with a Jason Bourne twist. Like, it's just fantastic stuff. But that guy writes fantastic action with smart-ass characters. That's right in my bailiwick, man. Bring the noise. And I've read a ton of that, and it makes its way into how I write. You know, I shoot for that in terms of timing, and I aspire to be as good as somebody like that is at the top of their game. So, yeah.
So writing for Chris Kennedy,
yeah.
How is writing for a publisher different than writing for yourself? Paul has done this. I haven't done this.
Yeah.
I mainly wrote for myself, but that's actually not true. I write with Glenn Stewart, so I kind of dance to the tune of the novel there. So I do kind of write for a publisher as well, but I want to hear your take on it.
I think it depends on what you're doing. My first book that I started out with the Mako series. That was all indie stuff. Henceforth, anything I write in that world is going to be indie, and I want to keep that to myself. Colonies Lost, I traditionally pubbed through Red Adept Publishing. I had built a relationship with them through the convention circuit. They've also done a lot of editing work for me because they run an editing house in addition to their pub house. But they have a sci-fi arm of their publishing press. So I knew I would get really quality stuff out of them from a product standpoint, and I trusted them to traditionally publish my first book. And that process was a lot smoother than I could have ever imagined. Even though it's their book, because they're signing it and they're footing the bill for editing and cover design, they were very clear that we are not going to drown out your voice. We're going to take care of you. We're going to respect your story. We're definitely going to throw in our 2 cents for what we feel makes the story better. But you are very much a part of this process, and we never want you to believe otherwise. So, I don't think anybody could ask for better than what I got from Red Adept when it comes to working with a small press or traditional press. Working with Chris Kennedy Publishing was very much the same way. Chris very much takes that same approach with his authors. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, he is in your corner. He's working with you. He's partnering with you. He wants to make this project everything it can be because he's just as invested in it as you are as the publisher. Having said that, the real chief difference in working with Chris versus working with Red Adept or being an indie was this was the first time in my career that I was writing in somebody else's sandbox. And that was a big deal for me. I felt a lot of pressure on that just because, Chris and Mark have built such a phenomenal world with the 4HU. It's so in-depth, but it's so well-crafted and so carefully put together that I wanted to make sure that I gave them something that I felt was worthy of that standard. And it was a little bit of a pressure cooker at times, particularly in the military stuff, kind of like we talked about before. But they were both fantastic. When I sent them the first draft of the story, it had taken me about 9 months to bang it out. And by the time I got finished with that, there had been a lot of stuff that had transpired in the 4HU from the time I started. If you recall, Chris was banging out books in that universe, like just about a book a week. There was a ton happening. So there had been a lot of things that had taken place from a story standpoint from the time I started to the time I turned in the draft. And by the time they got it, they were like, whoa, Hoss, we're starting to step into some areas here that things have changed. or B, you're bringing some stuff up here that we have plans for down the line. So we need to make sure we really, mold this to a point where it fits where we are in the now. We're at now, as we said in Spaceballs.
When it's then now.
Yeah. So, we went back through it, and they gave me all their big highlights on, okay, we need you to change this. We need you to tweak this. We need you to polish this. And they were splendid every step of that way. For a lot of the major rewrites that went into that story, every time I finished a chunk, I would send it to them. And, within 6 hours to 12 hours, 24 hours, I had, the draft back with track changes saying, okay, this is good, this is good, this is good. Let's polish this. Let's change this. We're going to work this to fit this. Good to go. Put it in the can, moving on. And we got all of that done in about 2 months. And by the time we finished it, everybody seemed to be really pleased with where the story was at. And it went straight to editing, and it's set for release on Friday. So that was kind of my experience working with the 2 small presses that I've worked with in addition to being an indie. Both were wonderful, wonderful experiences. I would work with either of those presses again on future projects. The chief difference was I was doing my own thing with Red Adept. It was my story and my world. And with CKP, it was about really building something that fit an established universe, which was definitely a lot of work. But in the end, it was really a rewarding experience. And I hope the fans like it as much as I did, because I love the story. I mean, I make no bones about that. I mean, anybody who knows anything about me knows that I'm a total sucker for classic rock documentaries, and all of that stuff. So to essentially write a science fiction homage to Leonard Skinner, which was one of my favorite bands growing up, was just wild in and of itself. But it was kind of one of those deals where what started as just a cute little idea in a short story morphed into its totally own thing. And 90,000 words later, you've got what I hope is a really good, really fun read for fans.
I've never did anything with Red Adept Publishing, but Lynn and Red Adept has done editing on all of my indie stuff so far. So I'm very familiar with them from that side of the house.
They are very top flight. In order to, when you go through a publishing process with them on the publishing side, you're going to get that same standard when it comes to editing. And you're probably going to work with a lot of the same people. She's got a wonderful staff under her.
Agreed.
And, and I mean, they spare no expense, and they pull no punches either, which is nice. And I welcome that as a writer. I think writing, in a lot of respects, the editing process is very much a contact sport. You better dial in and strap on your cup, buddy, because we ain't here to play around. When an editor comes after a story, it's to make it better. And if you can't handle that, maybe this isn't the business for you. Go let your mom read the book. It's her job to tell you how awesome it is. A good editor is supposed to break it down and tell you, this is where the story is strong. This is where it needs some work. We're going to help you reinforce the former and beef up the latter. And that's exactly what they do at Red Adept. Whether you're on the editing side of things or the publishing side of things, they put quality first, man, and they spare no expense for it, which is one of the reasons why I was just so enamored with the way Colonies Lost came out. It was everything I wanted it to be. I could have never made that book better as an indie. There is nothing that we changed in the publishing process that I would have said, well, you know what, as an indie, I would have left that be. And, if you're an author looking to work with a traditional press, you can't ask for better than that.
I know that setting aside ego is hard for a lot of writers. Thankfully, it's one of the problems that I haven't had. I've had my other share of problems that I've had, but setting aside my writer ego and listening to other people's opinions on how the story could be better has not been one of my failings to date.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and mine either. And I tried to really come at it from I had no choice but to come at it from a very open, a very open end of things when I first started all of this. I mean, listen, the fact of the matter is I didn't know how to write a book when I wrote Mako, not on page. I knew how a book was supposed to sound all day long because I was raised on audiobooks. But dude, I kid you not, I didn't even know that when you write a thought, like a character thinking a thought, if you just put that in italics, you're telling the reader that's a thought. That's not a verbal speech. That's a thought in that character's head. I didn't know that. So I had no experience reading novels on a page because I couldn't do it as a kid. So I needed great editing help to really help me, to teach me style and teach me technique like that, but also to help me buff out the rough edges and make the book all it could be. So I'm with you.
So with the book coming out just in the next few days, by the time this episode comes out next week, it will be out.
Okay.
What's next on your hit parade of value?
You know what? Last year I really went gung ho after a whole bunch of different projects, and I got most of that done. But this year I think I'm going to try and rein it back a little bit. I have plans for another book in the Makoverse called Detron City Vice that is going to take the Danny Tucker character in kind of a new direction, and in a lot of respects kind of reboot that universe. It'll pick up after the events of the last book in the saga, but it's going to be a few years later. And it's going to be kind of a whole new section of that universe that we've never seen before. And the upshot of that is it'll help me to it'll give me an opportunity to kind of wipe the slate clean in a lot of respects and kind of touch up some of the blemishes that existed in that world. It was the first one I ever created. And write some whole new stories about some characters that readers have told me they've really enjoyed. So that's going to be my first novel project that I'm going to tackle after Freebird comes out. I've already got it outlined. I've already got all of my world stuff pretty well in the can. So that should be ready to go, and I'm going to try and bang that out and have it ready to go to edit by early summertime. Other than that, there's a couple of anthologies coming out that I want to try and tackle. JR posted one the other day that I'm kind of interested in taking a look at. There's another one from another small press that I caught in a Facebook group the other day that I want to investigate. And then Chris is going to have another anthology or two coming out in the 4HU later on this year that I'd really like to sign on for and write another short story there. As far as what I'll do there, early reviews from some of our advanced readers on Freebird have been that one of the things they really enjoyed about the world, that the story that I told, was the world I created down south. The fun part about writing Freebird was, 4HU has done a great job telling stories about all these amazing worlds with all these amazing societies and races of aliens and stuff. And we've definitely, had a lot of stories to tell on Earth with Cartwright's Cavaliers and Aspirin Solutions, and pretty much the entire, the whole first 4 books all took place on Earth, and there have been Earth books since. But nobody in all that time has touched the Deep South. It's pretty well just been Texas and the Middle East and a few other places. Deep South was pretty well undiscovered country as far as the 4HU goes. So when I set out to create, my version of a 4HU book, I knew right there that's where I want to set it. That's because that's where I'm from. So I know North Florida. I'm from the Panhandle. So I grew up stomping around Jacksonville and Panama City, Florida, and Pensacola. And I mean, that's my stomping grounds. So I knew that was kind of where I wanted to build things up, and being able to tell a story about where Florida was at that time in history when all of this takes place, that it's now 2 states. And for those who read the short story, this. South Florida at the end of the 22nd century, or the end of the 21st century, will secede from North Florida. They wanted to become their own state, and so they did, and they became their own state. Orlando is the capital, and that's that. And all of Florida's major tourism drivers went with them on that. So that hung North Florida out to dry completely. North Florida, for all intents and purposes, became a statewide answer to Detroit. Everything was abandoned. Everything was run down. They had no business. They had no industry. Everybody left. It's a ghost town, the entire state. So state lawmakers got together and said, listen, we're circling the drain. If we don't do something radically different, we're going to cease to exist. We're going to be gone. So what are we doing here? So they looked around and said, mercenaries pretty well run the world. That's the global economic driver is mercenaries. We look everywhere. That's what people are doing to make major money. We need to attract that business, and we need to attract it here. What are we doing? So they stripped down their tax code. They get rid of everything they've got, save for a 1-cent sales tax on goods and services, and that's it. And business flocked to North Florida. And the vast majority of that was mercenaries. Looking at Jacksonville, a lot of people don't know this. Jacksonville is the 5th biggest city in America when it comes to landmass. So you put a city that big with that much land to sell on the cheap out in front of people looking to buy, and immediately mercs just start picking up properties. Whether it's what is now Mayport down in Jacksonville outside of Atlantic Beach, whether it's down in Orange Park or down in St. Johns County, there was room to spare, and mercenaries came in and just bought it up, hook, line, and sinker. And so that is the environment that I get to tell this story in for the 4HU. Bringing all of that full circle, that was one of the things that a lot of our advanced readers said that they really liked, and that they want more short story and more stories out of North Florida to see what else that environment looks like. So for a short story for the next anthology that I do with those guys, I'm probably going to end up pitching to Chris a story of something around that angle. Here's another Merck company in North Florida. This is their story. Here's what they do. And that's going to be my year. 2 short stories and a novel. If I could bang out another novel, that would be great, but I'm going to just kind of shoot for the moon instead of the stars this year, and we're going to stick with that.
That sounds like a good plan.
I hope so. My hairline can't take any more stress. What can I say?
We wish Terry's beard would face more stress. Then maybe it would trim itself.
That's not what you said at lunch, man.
I said all sorts of things at lunch, most of which you've forgotten by now.
Most of which, during lunch, you expressed your love of my beard.
I expressed no love for your beard at all.
Hey, man, I tip my cap to both of you guys on the beard. I've tried. Most recently, when I was on vacation down in Florida for New Year's, I let it go for about a week. And I hit about day 7 or 8. It's itchy. It's hot. My face feels oily and gross. I can't do it, man. And I'm standing in the shower, and right before me is a big honking jar of can of Gillette shaving gel and a brand new razor. And I just think to myself, that's going to feel so awesome going across my face, like right now, and the heat and the steam. And I got nothing but time. I can stand here and I can just enjoy every stroke of that glorious feeling of that blade making me clean again. And that's it. And so goes the beard, and it's gone. Oh,
I can see you shaving, and in the background you hear, oh, yeah.
I'm going to pitch that. That's right. I'm going to pitch that to Old Spice and see if maybe they're Gillette and see if they'll give me some ad time.
Now, see, what I'm waiting for is I'm waiting for the commercial where the person shaving is on a space station without gravity.
Oh, there you go. That could be interesting.
That's what I'm waiting for. Yeah, exactly. I want to see, you put the shaving cream in your face, there's little dollops kind of floating up around you. And every time you get done like that, the shaving cream and little hairs come off flying around. I think it'd be awesome.
That would be pretty funny.
Terry, get on that. You need to put that scene in your books because your people have nothing better to do than shave.
I don't think I've ever had anyone shave in one of my books. I've never mentioned that act at all.
You see, this is something we haven't discussed. Sanitation.
Personal hygiene?
Yes, sanitation and personal hygiene in space. I mean, seriously, think about it. How the hell do you deodorize those spacesuits?
You don't. The smell is actually part of the Mill Sci-Fi charm.
Oh, God. Oh,
nice.
Oh.
I take it from the first couple of seconds I was on the show that one or both of you guys are sports fans.
That's Paul.
Nice, Paul. We can talk when we get off air, brother. I'm your Huckleberry. One of the talking about writing things in space in a science fiction setting with Freebird, I got to do one thing that I've always wanted to do. Now, bear in mind, I got a sports background. My master's degree was in sport administration. I've worked for Florida State Athletics. I've worked for NASCAR. I've worked for Charlotte Motor Speedway. I've worked for the Grand Prix of St. Petersburg. That was very much my background for a long time. So sports is very much in my DNA, just as much as spaceships and aliens were. So Freebird marked the first opportunity I really got to put those two things together. I told you about the North Florida thing and the economics and how all of that worked in order to be able to tell that story. But I still felt like when I was done with that little bit of exposition in the book that I needed an example to drive home the point. So I thought, well, you know what? There's the Tampa Bay Rays just languishing in futility down south right now with no fan base. Nobody goes out to support that team. The only time they ever sell out is when New York or Boston comes to town because of all the snowbirds who live in Tampa, St. Pete. There's nothing there for them except a crappy old dome that just looks horrible and has since it was built in the 80s. What would happen if Major League Baseball decided they wanted to get in on that money gravy train in North Florida? Lo and behold, the Jacksonville Generals were born. So I moved the Tampa Bay Rays to North Florida, rebranded them as the Jacksonville Generals, and that's like totally a staple of popular culture in Jacksonville at the time of the story. And it was a blast to write, man. I got to write like a sparring contest between this guy and his buddy, who's a diehard Red Sox fan, and naturally these guys are still in the AL East because that's where the Rays are, and the guy was just lamenting how much he hates the Generals. He's like, once upon a time it was the Yankees because they would go out and they would poach all the free agents off of us, but now it's the freaking Generals because nobody can compete with them for free agents. These guys sign a $100 million contract, come down here. Maybe that's worth 60, 70 in New York. They come down here, it's worth 85. So Jacksonville just offers them a contract for 87. They're paying less in payroll. The free agents are making more money, and freaking nobody else can win a World Series. And I told that in my sci-fi book, and it was awesome.
See, you do that. I'm planning on having the Houston Texans eaten.
Oh, now why is that? Expound upon that, sir.
Very pissed off fan. That's what you have here.
Yeah,
plus, it just goes along with the Black Series. I mean, if you can't have a kaiju stomping on a stadium, what the hell what's the point of having a kaiju?
Very true. I maintain that franchise should have never existed. Terry, you got to excuse us for a second here, brother.
Go ahead on.
No,
you gotta
table this discussion because I have a feeling it's going to involve lots of vitriol on my side.
Let me say this, and then I'll drop it. For my money, and this, in all seriousness, I totally believe this. That team should have never existed. It should have been the Houston Oilers. Whenever Houston moved south to Tennessee, they had no right to take that legacy with them. It should have stayed in Houston, just the same way it did with Cleveland. And when they got an expansion team, it should have friggin' been the Houston Oilers, and that was that. That's my 2 cents.
Okay, there's hope for you after all. We might be able to have a civil discussion. Maybe.
I'm a Buccaneers fan, so don't.
Oh my God!
To that. That we will discuss off camera.
Feel my pain.
Well, that was an ugly turn.
Yeah, no doubt.
So when you're writing detective fiction in space, when you're doing mystery and that kind of stuff, did you find any problems in trying to marry those two things together?
I really didn't. And really, there's a reason for that. It's because I wrote another group of humans in space. I'm not giving any spoilers away on Colonies Lost here. It's pretty well indicated on the back cover, and if you read the first, 30 pages of the book, you pretty well get this. This guy that's the protagonist, Trip Hackett, is a U.S. Marshal who gets drummed out for an on-the-job shooting. He was totally justified in what he did, but there was a lot of politics involved in it. So rather than make a scene, he just decides, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take my retirement and going to cash out. So best of luck to you guys. Only they're not going to give him his retirement. So that leaves him scrounging for money, anything he can take, and he decides to go freelance when he gets offered a missing persons case. This real weird guy walks into a bar, says, I represent a very wealthy man. His daughter has gone missing. We need help finding her. So this guy, he's got to do it. He's got to take the job. He needs to get paid. So he takes it and says, it's going to be the last thing I do with a badge ever. And so he goes off, and lo and behold, this guy who has just hired him is the long lost descendant of one of the surviving colonists from the lost colony of Roanoke Island. And they are on another world. And so and they've built a whole civilization there. There's a whole story about what happened to them after they were taken. And so this story is set in the present day on that world, in their society, with their rules and their people. So in answer to your question, I got to write a police procedural involving other humans in a missing persons case on another world. So there were rules and things that I had to create because obviously I'm on an alien world. So that impacted the story. But as far as the interactions of the people, that wasn't hard because humans are always going to fall back to what they know with regard to structure and society, and a lot of that when they go to build community, a lot of times old patterns come back and cities on other worlds spring up just the way that they would here. So the world that pops up on Sonaro is no different, and Trip Hackett has to integrate his way into that. He's got to figure out real quick and in a hurry who the players are so that he can try and solve the case and bring this girl home. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that was how I wrote a police procedural in space. As far as the cop angle of it goes, I'm very fortunate in that I know a lot of cops. I worked as a civilian employee in law enforcement when I was in grad school back home in Tallahassee. Got to know lots of people. I worked in a crime scene unit. So I picked up a couple little pointers here and there on how procedure works. But then, I've got any number of guys, one in particular who I call once I was done with the story and said, okay, here's what I need. Make this guy more authentic. Help me, refine his craft so he feels like a true detective. And then those guys take it and read it and say, okay, in this chapter, he's obviously talking to a witness. He does this and this, but one of the things that we would obviously do is we have to ask this. We have to cover this ground to establish background and motive. He doesn't do that. So you're going to need to work that into your dialogue. And then I go write it in. I make sure it's what they think it ought to be. And then I polish it from an editing standpoint to make it smooth. And then I move on to the next chapter. And that's kind of how I wrote the police end of it and tried to make that authentic. So.
Did you have to come up with any new laws or any new craziness to fit with the space station itself?
They are not on a space station.
Well,
they're on
yeah,
a planet,
whatever.
And well, no, it's a very Earth-like world, and that's why they were taken, was because this race of people who took them, they, physiologically are not built to be able to survive in those types of warm conditions. They're very much a sub-zero cold weather race. And even in enviro gear, they can't survive long enough to be able to mine this mineral that's there that can make them a lot of money. So they decide, okay, we're going to sneak under the radar here, not let the authorities know, but we need to go out and get ourselves some slave labor. Where can we go that's off the grid, completely off the grid? Nobody can know that we're doing this, but we need to find a race of people who can survive in these types of conditions. And through a whole series of events, they happen upon Earth. And when they get ready to snatch people, they're very meticulous about we can't go from a city, even though we can obviously get more people, more subjects from a metropolitan area. We cannot risk being found. If the guilds find out that we're here, we're going to be found out and we're going to be screwed. We've got to keep this on the DL. Well, lo and behold, here's this group of about 100+ people out in the middle of nowhere on the North American continent that are ripe for the picking. And that's why they get snatched and taken to this world. So it is a world that's very Earth-like, which is why they were taken. From a geography standpoint, I had to write some things a little bit differently, but all in all, it's a very Earth-like world. But it was fun to do that.
Okay. I was just curious if there was any specific things you had to change or add into that.
Not necessarily. There's a couple of moments when I'm on spaceships that obviously Trip has to kind of get used to that because he's never been in space before. He's a cop from Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. This is not his bag. He's out of his well here. So there was that, but for the most part, no. That book was about building character and telling what happened to these people, what happened to their children and their children's children, to make them the society that they are now, and tell the story of how they fit into this greater civilization, which does have aliens and does have rules and laws that they have to adhere to. If I do more books in that world, then I will go back and expand quite a bit on the alien angle of things. But predominantly, Colonies Lost was a human-on-human story with spaceships, which is awesome.
Well, you would hope you have spaceships in that particular kind of story.
Yeah, you kind of, in a science fiction drama, you typically need those sorts of things. Yeah.
If you're planet hopping, yeah, you better have spaceships. Or
you gotta have a ride. There is no Uber.
Either that, or you've got to have wormholes a la Stargate.
There you go.
No.
So, but no, it was. But no, Colonies was. It was a lot of fun in that regard to write. It was like I said, I had always wanted to write kind of a police procedural, but with a real Western twist to it. The protagonist in that book is very much a gunslinger, and for a lot of reasons, and definitely wears a Stetson for a lot of reasons. So when people ask me what it is, I tell them it's Justified meets Louis L'Amour in space, and that's pretty well the twist of it.
That is okay, listeners. That is how you sell a book, right there. That is how you sell a book, right there.
Well, the Mako Saga, I get asked that one too, and that's The Last Starfighter meets The Italian Job,
right,
in space.
Yeah, I kind of got that idea from the general description. It definitely had Last Starfighter written all over it.
It does. But I would like to point out for your listeners and your viewers that I wrote Mako long before Ready Player One was even a blip on the radar. So that is not derivative, dadgummit. That's my story. So
there's nothing new under the sun. You write something you think is brand new. Somebody's already done something about it, and somebody will do something after you finished it.
Yeah, oh yeah, no doubt. Well, believe it or not, I mean, one of the things that was kind of the inspiration for Mako in terms of using that as a story vehicle was, I mean, video games have evolved, from light years from where they were whenever I was a kid. I mean, I remember when I was in sixth grade, seventh grade, and everybody was playing Contra and Mario Brothers and Skate or Die and Duck Hunt and all that stuff. And you fast forward to what we've got now with Fallout and Call of Duty, and it's freaking absurd. And I was watching the news one day, and there was an actual news story, national news story about how the military is using this technology now, combined with what we have close to VR now, to train troops, to train the military. And I thought, whoa, well, that's a long way from the last Starfighter in that goofy looking arcade game that the Lance guest was playing on in a trailer park. I should do something with that. And
I don't know. I thought they used Space Invaders to train the military. That's what I thought was used there. Space Invaders and Missile Command.
If you believe Robert Downey, it's Gattaca. But who knows? Who's to say?
Galactica?
Galactica.
Or Galaga.
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 Galaga. There we go. Not Gattaca.
Let me give you a pro tip. As somebody that has played more than my fair share of those type of video games, is you do not want to go ahead and play Space Invaders for 24 hours straight, because then every time you close your eyes, you see and it just
the best thing now is to go play Rocket League for about 3 hours and then go drive on the real roads. Because you're expecting, suddenly you find that you're going way too slow all the time, even when you're going 20 miles over the speed limit. It's a bad thing.
Gosh, I've got to go off course here a little bit, because last week there was a guy that I saw on the feeder road to the highway. He was on a motorcycle and he stopped at a stoplight in the lane next to me, and he starts adjusting the GoPro on his helmet and looking back at traffic, and you're like, oh, okay, he's going to be doing something. He's recording here. This ought to be entertaining. And so the light turns green and he takes off, and it was so disappointing, because you're like, that's it. That's all the speed you've got. You're adjusting your GoPro for this?
Well, maybe he wasn't planning on peeling out.
Oh, yes, he was. His body language said, I'm hauling ass. His bike did not.
Well, Terry, some of us could only afford a 75cc. I don't know what the problem is.
Well, actually, I think we were about to wind down. We've been talking for about an hour, and I wanted to give you the closing minutes here to tell everyone where they can find you.
Okay. Well, naturally, like most authorly people, I've got a website. So ianjmalone.net is your source for all of that. You can find news on me there. If you sign up for my mailing list, you get not one, but three short stories. They are prequel tie-ins to Mako, Colonies Lost, and I now have a tie-in for Freebird Rising called Pronounced Riley Osiris. So anyway, go out, feel free to sign up for my mailing list and grab that. I do the Twitter thing. I'm on Facebook. You can find me there. Grudgingly, I do the Facebook thing. I tend to be much more of a Twitter guy. At Ian J. Malone on either one of those, you can find me and track me down. Obviously, all the news, anything you want to know about me is on my website on the news desk. I even have swag now. The Jacksonville Generals ball team that I told you about for Freebird. I just launched an online store with ball caps and T-shirts and the whole spiel. I do the audio thing, so if you want to catch me on audio, go to Audible, look me up. I'm there. That's pretty much it.
And the book that is, by the time this comes out, the book that will already have just come out is
Freebird Rising, and that is a Four Horsemen universe novel. Very proud of that.
Available everywhere that the rest of the Four Horsemen universe is found.
That is correct. So go out, find it. I hope you enjoy it. If you do, please leave it an honest review, and we hope to be writing more soon. But thank you guys so much for having me on, man. It's been a blast. I always enjoy doing these. Whether it's talking craft or whether it's talking music and sports, man, I'm always down. So thanks for giving me a platform and letting me come hang out for an hour. It's been a blast.
We appreciate you coming on and talking with us.
Yeah, man. Anytime. We'll do it again soon.
All right, listeners, if you have a comment for us or you'd like to funnel a question through us about anything we've talked about, send us a note at show@deadrobotsociety.com. You can find Paul on Twitter at Paul_E_Cooley. The best place to find us is on Facebook at the Listeners of the Dead Robot Society Facebook group. If you would like to find the video for this, it is on YouTube at youtube.com/DRS podcast. We have to thank the good folks at podhoster.com for hosting the audio for your listening pleasure. And of course, if you would like to become a patron and for as little as $1 a month, get special content of stuff all the time. Yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Of stuff all the time?
Of
really?
Stuff all the time.
Really?
Hey, at least I mentioned it in the right order today.
Okay,
Don't
everybody,
judge me.
I promised to give him a script, and I have failed. I will give him a script next time.
That assumes I can read.
Continue the spiel.
You can find us at patreon.com/DRS podcast. And of course, if you are a $10 supporting patron, you get your names read on the show.
Yes, and I will try and get through them without stuttering too badly. And this week's patrons are Sue I Give Up Bayman, J.D. Barker, Jack F. Erickson, Kelson Brisk Brave Brigadiers Brandished Broad Bright Blades. Ha! Isabel, I forgot to change this wait for too long. Oops, cushy. After I did that previous one, that one tripped me up. Come on, Isabel, change your name. Rick, this shit's pretty good for something I last worked on 4 years ago. I know that feeling. Lisa Slack, Nathan Cosby, Cheryl Winters, Tracy Bodine, John Kilgallen, Devin Lee, Drew Rocco's Modern Line Bernardi, Chris Winder, Andre Conde Moraes, DJ Chamberlain, and J.R. Handley.
Thanks for your support, folks.
Yes, thank you very much.
And with that, we will catch you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Say goodbye.
Bye-bye.